Yeah, here we are. Come on over. This is the fire to be around tonight, folks. We got stories. And of course, I'm going to begin with more of Max Brand's book, the Untamed. We're on the second book, of course, with TRAILIN the Night Horseman. We're all the way up to chapter 21. But before I get started telling you this story, I'd like to say, it's been a year since Ginger started doing this, and, well, she asked me to help her write some stories and read some stories. It's been a fun year. Just wanted y'all to know that. And it doesn't sound like she plans on quitting anytime soon, so maybe we'll see you again for another year. It'll be fun. Well, I'm going to get on into this chapter 21, and this is where we'll start. Max Strand decides to keep the law. Well, it was hours later that night when Ha-Ha Langley and Max Strand sat their horses on the hill to the south. And before them, on the nearest rise of ground, a clump of tall trees and the sharp triangle of a roof split the sky. While down towards the right, spread a wide huddle of sheds and barns. Now that's where the trail ends, said Max Strand, and started his horse down that slope. Ha-Ha Langley urged his little mount hurriedly alongside the squat bulk of his companion. He looked like a skeleton, and Max Strand the blunt, deformed shadow. "You ain't going into that house looking for him, Mac?" he asked, and he lowered his voice to a sharp whisper in spite of the distance. "Maybe there's a pile of men in that house. It's got room for a whole army. You ain't going in by yourself, Mac." "Ha-ha," explained the big man quietly. "I ain't going after Barry. I'm going to make him come after me." Now Ha-ha considered this explanation for a dazed moment, but it was just a bit too mysterious for his comprehension. "Well then, what you gonna do?" he asked. "Well, would you know that black hoss again if you seen him?" asked Mac. "Well, in 1,000. That hoss has had a long ride, and Barry has put him in one of them barns. They ain't no doubts. Most like the dog is with the hoss." "Well, it looks like a considerable lot like a wolf," muttered Langley. I wouldn't choose meeting up with that dog in the dark, and besides, what good is it going to do for you to find that dog?" "Well, if you hurt a man's dog," explained Mac, "you're hurting a man, ain't you? Well, I'm going to hurt this man's dog. And afterwards, that dog will bring the man to me. They ain't no doubt of that. I ain't going to kill the dog. I'm going to just nick him so's he'll get well and then hit my trail. Now, what sense is they in that? Well, Barry comes to me. Ain't he the one that's breaking the law? If I kill him then, won't it be in self-defense? See, I ain't no lawbreaker, Ha-ha. It ain't any good being a lawbreaker. Them lawyers can talk a man right into a grave. They's worse than poison. I'd rather be caught in a bear trap 100 miles from my shack than have a lawyer fasten onto my right leg in the middle of Brownsville. No, Ha-ha, I ain't gonna break any law, but I'm gonna fix that wolf so's he'll know me, and when he gets well, he'll hit my trail, and when he hits my trail, he'll have Barry with him. And when Barry sees me, then..." He raised his arms above him in the dark, and Jerry can start sleeping sound for the first time. Ha-Ha Langley wrapped his own arms around himself. "And I'll be there to watch. I'll be there to see fair play. Don't you never doubt it, Mac. Why, didn't I never go with you before? Why, Jerry never done nothing to touch this. But be careful, Mac. Don't make no slip up tonight. If they's trouble, I ain't a fighting man, Mac. I ain't no ways built for it." "Shut your mouth," said Max Strand bluntly. "I need quiet now." For they were now close to the house. Max Strand brought his horse to a jog trot and cast a semicircle skirting the house and bringing him behind the barns. And here he retreated to a little jutting point of land from behind which the house was invisible, and there dismounted. Ha-Ha Langley followed example reluctantly. He complained, "I ain't never heard before of a man leaving his hoss behind him. It ain't right, it ain't policy." His leader, however, paid no attention to this grumbling. He skirted back behind the barns, walking with a speed which extended even the long legs of Haw Haw Langley. Most of the stock was turned out in the corrals. Now and then a horse stamped or a bull snorted from the fenced-in enclosures, but from the barns they heard not a sound. Now Mac Strand paused. They had reached the largest of the barns, a low, long structure. "This here," said Mac Strand, "is where that hoss must be. They wouldn't run a hoss like that with others. They'd keep him in a big stall by himself. And we'll try this one, Haw Haw." But Haw Haw drew back at the door. The interior was black as the hollow of a throat, and as soon as Mac Strand rolled back that sliding door, and Haw Haw imagined evil eyes glaring and twinkling at him along the edges of the darkness. "The wolf," he cautioned, grasping at the shoulder of his companion. "You ain't going to walk into that wolf, Mac." The latter struck down Haw Haw's hand. "A wolf makes a noise before it jumps," he whispered, "and that warning is all the light I need." Now their eyes grew somewhat accustomed to the dark, and Haw Haw could make out vaguely the post of the stalls to the right. He could not tell whether or not animals might be laying down between the posts, but Mac Strand, pausing at every stall, seemed to satisfy himself at a glance. Right down the length of the barn they passed until they reached a wall at the farther end. "He ain't here," sighed Haw Haw with relief. "Mac, if I was you, I'd wait till they was light before I went a-hunting that wolf." "Hell, he ought to be here," growled Mac Strand, and he lighted a match. The flame spurted in a blinding flash from the head of the match and settled down into a steady yellow glow. And by that brief glow, Mac Strand looked up and down the wall. The match burned out against the calloused tips of his fingers. "That wall," mused Strand, "ain't made out of the same timber as the side of the barn. That wall's a whole year's newer. Haw Haw, that ain't the end of the barn. There's a holler space beyond it." He lighted another match and then cursed softly in delight. "Look," he commanded. At the further side of the wall was a glitter of metal, the latch of a door opening in the wooden wall. Mac Strand set it ajar, and Haw Haw peered in over the big man's shoulder. He saw first a vague and formless glimmer. Then he made out a black horse lying down in the center of a box stall. The animal plunged at once to its feet, and crowding as far as possible away against the wall, turned its head and stared at them with flashing eyes. "It's him," whispered Haw Haw. "It's Barry's black. They ain't another hoss like him on the range, and the wolf, thank God, ain't with him." But Mac Strand closed the door of the stall, frowning thoughtfully, and thought on the face of Strand was a convulsion of pain. He dropped the second match to his feet, where it ignited a wisp of straw that sent up a puff of light. "Ah," drawled Mac Strand, "that wolf ain't here, but we'll have him here soon, and the thing that brings him here will get rid of the black hoss. Are you going to steal the hoss?" "Steal him? He couldn't carry me 2 miles, a skinny hoss like that. But if Barry ever gets away again on that hoss, I ain't never going to catch him. That hoss has got to die." Haw Haw Langley caught his breath with a harsh gurgle, for men of the mountain desert sometimes fall very low indeed, but in their lowest moments it is easier for him to kill a man than a horse. There is a story, for instance, of the cattleman who saw the bullfight in Juarez, and when that bull gored the first horse, the cowpuncher rose in the crowd and sent a bullet through the picador to square the deal. So Haw Haw sighed. "Mac," he whispered, "has it got to be done? Ain't there any other way? I've seen that hoss. When the sun hits him, it sets him on fire. He's that sleek, and his legs is like drawn iron. They're that fine. And he's got a head that's finer than a man's head, Mac." "I've seen him close enough," answered Mac Strand grimly, "and I've followed him for a day and a half damn near. S'pose Barry finds out I'm on his trail. S'pose he went follow the wolf when the wolf tries to lead him to me. S'pose he gets on this hoss and cuts away. Can I follow the wind, ha? No, this hoss has got to die. From the manger he threw out several arms full of hay, wrenched down from behind the manger several light boards and tossed them on the hay. He lighted a match and was approaching the small flame to the pile of flammables when Ha Langley cried softly, "Hark, Mac!" The big man instantly extinguished the match. For a moment they could distinguish nothing, and then they heard the sharp, high chorus of the wild geese flying north. Ha Langley snickered apologetically. "That's what I heard a minute ago," he said, and it sounded like voices a-coming. A snarl of contempt from Mac Strand, then he scratched another match, and at once the flame licked up the side of the hay and cast a long arm up that wooden wall. "Out of this, quick!" commanded Mac Strand, and they started hastily down the barn towards the door. The fire behind them, after the puff of flame from the hay, had died away to a ghastly and irregular glow with the crackle of the slowly catching wood. It gave small light to guide them, only enough, indeed, to deceive the eye. The posts of the stalls grew into vast shadowy images. The irregularities of the floor became high places and pits alternately. But when they were halfway to the door, Ha Langley saw a form too grim to be a shadow blocking their path. It was merely a blacker shape among the shades, but Ha was aware of the two shining eyes and stopped short in his tracks. "The wolf," he whispered to Mac Strand. "Mac, what are we going to do?" The other had not time to answer, for the shadow at the door of the barn now leaped towards them silently, without growl or yelp or snarl, as if to guide the battle. The kindling wood behind them now ignited and sent up a yellow burst of light. By it, Ha Langley saw the great beast clearly, and he leaped back behind the sheltering form of Mac Strand. As for Mac, he did not move or flinch from the attack. His revolver was in his hand, leveled, and following the swift course of Black Bart. Chapter 22. Patience. There is one patience greater than the endurance of the cat at the hole of the mouse, or the wolf which waits for the moose to drop, and that is the patience of the thinking man. The measure of the Hindu's moveless contemplation of nirvana is not in hours, but in weeks or even months. Randall Byron sat at his sentinel post with his hands folded and his grave eyes steadily fixed before him, and for hour after hour he did not move. Though the wind rose now and again and whistled through the upper chambers or mourned down the empty halls, Randall Byron did not stir so much as an eyelash in observance. Two things held him fascinated. One was the girl who had passed up yonder stairs so wearily without a single backward glance at him, and the other was the silent battle which went on in the adjoining room. Now and then his imagination wandered away to secondary pictures. He would see Barry meeting Buck Daniels at last and striking him down as remorselessly as the hound strikes the hare. Or he would see him riding back towards Elkhead and catch a bright, sad vision of Kate Cumberland waving a careless adieu, and then hear her singing carelessly as she turned away. Such pictures as these, however, came up but rarely in the mind of Byron. Mostly he thought of the stranger leaning over the body of old Joe Cumberland, reviving him, storing him with electric energy, paying back, as it were, some ancient debt. And he thought of the girl as she had turned at the landing place of the stairs, her head fallen, and he thought of her lying in her bed, with her arm under the mass of bright hair, trying to sleep, very tired, but remorselessly held awake by the same power which was bringing Joe Cumberland back from the verge of death. It was all impossible. This thing could not be. It was really as bad as the yarn of the Frankenstein monster. He considered how it would seem in print, backed by his most solemn asseverations. And then he saw the faces of the men who associated with him, pale, thoughtful faces, striving to conceal their smiles and their contempt. But always he came back like the desperate hare doubling on his course upon the picture of Kate Cumberland there at the turning of the stairs, and that bent, bright head which confessed defeat. The man had forgotten her. It made Byron open his eyes in incredulity even to imagine such a thing. The man had forgotten her. She was no more to him than some withered hag he might ride past on the road. His ear, subconsciously attentive to everything around him, caught a faint sound from the next room. It was a regular noise. It had the rhythm of a quick footfall, but in its nature it was more like the sound of a heavily beating pulse. Randall Byron sat up in his chair. A faint creaking attested that it was indeed a footfall traversing the room to and fro steadily. The stranger then no longer leaned over the couch of the old cattleman. He was walking up and down the floor with that characteristic softly padding step. Of what did he think as he walked? It carried Byron automatically out to the darkest night with the wind in his face and the rhythm of a long striding horse carrying him on to a destination unknown. Here he heard a soft scratching repeated at the door. When it came again, he rose and opened the door. At once the tall, shaggy dog slipped through the opening and glided past him. It startled Byron oddly to see the animal stealing away as if Barry himself had been leaving. He called the beast, but he was met by a silent baring of white fangs that stopped him in his tracks. The great dog was gone without a sound, and Byron closed the door again without casting a look inside. He was stupidly, foolishly afraid to look within. After that, the silence had a more vital meaning. No pictures crowded his brain. He was simply keyed to a high point of expectancy, and therefore, when the door was opened silently, he sprang up as if in acknowledgment of an alarm and faced Barry. The latter closed the door behind him and glided after the big dog. He had almost crossed the big room when Byron was able to speak. "Mr. Barry," he called. The man hesitated. "Mr. Barry," he repeated. And Dan Barry turned. It was something like the act of the wolf the moment before. A swift movement, a flash of the eyes, and something like defiance. "Mr. Barry, are you leaving us?" "I'm going outside." "Are you coming back?" "I don't know." A great joy swelled in the throat of Dr. Byron. He felt like shouting in triumph. Yet he remembered once more how that girl had gone up the stairs wearily with fallen head, and he decided that he would do what he could to keep that stranger with them. And if Randall Byron lived to be 100, he would never do a finer thing than what he attempted then. He stepped across the room and stood before Barry, blocking his way. "Sir," he said gravely, "if you go now, you will work a great sorrow in this house." A glint of anger rose in the eyes of Barry. "Joe Cumberland is sleeping sound," he answered. "He'll be a pile rested when he wakes up. He don't need me no more." "He's not the only one who needs you," said Byron. "His daughter has been waiting impatiently for your coming, sir." The sharp glance of Barry wavered away. "I'd kind of like to stay," he murmured, "but I got to go." A dull voice called from the next room. "It's Joe Cumberland," said Byron. "You see, he's not sleeping." The brow of Barry clouded, and he turned gloomily back. Maybe I better stay," he agreed. Yet before he made a step, Byron heard a faraway honking of the wild geese. That musical discord carrying for uncounted miles through the windy air. The sound worked like magic on Barry. He whirled back. "I got to go," he repeated. And yet Byron blocked his way. It required more courage to do that than to do anything he'd ever attempted in his life. The sweat poured out from under his armpits as that stranger stepped near. The blood rushed from his face as he stared into the eyes of Barry. Eyes which now held an uncanny glimmer of yellow light. "Sir," said Byron huskily, "you must not go. Listen, Old Cumberland is calling to you again. Does that mean nothing? If you have some errand out in the night, let me go for you." "Partner," said the soft voice of Barry, "stand aside. I got no time. I'm wanted." Every muscle of Randall Byron's body was set to repulse the stranger in any effort to pass through that door. And yet, mysteriously, against his will, he found himself standing to one side and saw the other slip through the open door. "Dan, are ye there?" called a louder voice from the room beyond. There was no help for it. He himself must go back and face Joe Cumberland. With a lie, no doubt. He would say that Dan had stepped out for a moment and would be back again. That might put Cumberland safely back to sleep. In the morning, to be sure, he would find out the deception, but let every day bury its dead. Here was enough trouble for one night. He went slowly, but steadily enough towards the door of what had now become the fatal room to the doctor. In that room he had seen his dearest doctrines cremated. Out of that room he had come bearing the ashes of his hopes in his hands. Now he must go back once more to try to fill with science a gap of which science could never take cognizance. He lingered another instant with his hand on the door, then he cast it wide bravely enough and stepped inside. Joe Cumberland was sitting up on the edge of his couch. There was color in the old man's face. It almost seemed to the incredulous eyes of Byron that the face had filled out just a bit. Certainly, the fire of the old cattleman's glance was less unearthly. "Where's Dan?" he called. "Where'd he go?" It was no longer the deep, controlled voice of the stoic. It was almost the whining complaint of a vital weakness. "Is there anything I can do for you?" parried Byron. "Anything you need or wish?" "Him," answered the old man explosively. "Damn it, I need Dan. Where is he? He was here. I felt him here while I was sleeping. Where is he?" "Well, he has stepped out for an instant," answered Byron smoothly, "and he will be back shortly." "He has stepped out," echoed the old man slowly. "Let's try that again. He has stepped out," echoed the old man slowly. Then he rose to the full of his gaunt height. His white hair, his triangle of beard and pointed mustache gave him a detached, a medieval significance. A portrait by Van Dyck had stepped from its frame. "Doc, you're lying to me. Where's he gone?" A sudden, almost hysterical burst of emotion swept Dr. Byron. "Gone to heaven or hell," he cried with startling violence. "Gone to follow the wind and the wild geese, God knows where." Like a period to his sentence, a gun barked outside. There was a howl of demonic pain and rage, and then a scream that would tingle in the ear of Dr. Randall Byron until his dying day. Chapter 23. How Mac Strand Kept the Law. For when the dog sprang, Mac Strand fired, and the wolf was jerked up in the midst of his leap by the tearing impact of the bullet. It was easy for Strand to dodge the beast, and the great black body hurtled past and struck heavily on the floor of the barn. It missed Mac Strand indeed, but it fell at the very feet of Haw Haw Langley, and a splash of blood flitted across his face. He was too terrified to shriek, but fell back against the wall of the barn, gasping. There he saw Black Bart struggle to regain his feet vainly, for both of the animal's forelegs seemed paralyzed. And now the yellow light of the fire rose brightly, and by it Haw Haw marked the terrible eyes and the lolling, slavering tongue of the great beast, and the fangs like ivory daggers. It could not regain its feet, but it thrust itself forward by convulsive efforts of the hind legs toward Mac Strand. Haw Haw Langley stared for a single instant in white-faced fear. But when he realized that Black Bart was helpless as a toothless old dog, that tall cowpuncher twisted his lean fingers with a silent joy. Once more, Bart pushed himself towards Mac Strand, and then Haw Haw Langley stepped forward, and with all the force of his long legs smashed his heavy riding boot into the face of the dog. Black Bart toppled back against the base of the manger, struggling vainly to regain his poise. And it was then that he pointed his nose up and wailed like a lost soul, wailed with the fury of impotent hate. Max Strand caught Ha-Ha by the arm and dragged him back towards the door. "I don't want to kill the dog," he repeated. "Get out of here, Ha-Ha. Barry'll be coming any minute." He could have used no sharper spur to urge on the haggard. Ha-Ha Langley raced out of the barn a full stride ahead of Max Strand. They hurried together to the little rise of ground behind which they'd left their horses, and as they ran, the scream which had curdled the blood of Randall Byron rang through the night. In 1,000 years he could never have guessed from what that yell issued. His nearest surmise would have been a score of men screaming in unison under the torture. But Max Strand and Ha-Ha Langley knew the sound well enough. When they mounted their saddles, they could look over the top of the little hill and observe everything easily without being seen. For the hilltop commanded a range of the corrals and a view of the fronts of the barns and the sheds which opened upon the fenced enclosures. The largest and the longest of these buildings was now plainly visible, for a long arm of fire reached above the roof on one side of the low shed, and by this growing light the other barns, the glimmering-eyed horses and the cattle of the corrals, the trees about the house itself, they were in turn visible, though vaguely and at times, as the flames lapsed. All were lost in a flood of swift darkness. One more of the unhuman shriek echoed from hill to hill and from building to building. It was Satan in his box stall. The flames were eating through the partition, and the stallion was mad with fear. Lights flashed here and there in the big ranch house, and from the bunkhouse on the farther side of the corrals rose a volley of curses and yells of dismay. The cattle began milling blindly, bellowing and stamping. The horses ranged at a mad gallop back and forth across their corrals, wide-eyed with terror. It was like the tumult of a battle, and sharper than a trumpet, a new sound cut through the din. It was a short, high whistle repeated twice. An answer came from the burning barn. The long, strong neighing of the stallion. "Do you hear?" muttered Max Strand. "It's the hoss talking to his master." "And there he comes," said Ha-Ha Langley, "running like the wind." The flame, picked up by the gale, tore for itself a wider breathing space through the roof and sent up an audibly roaring column of blinding red. By that light, Max Strand, following Ha-Ha's directing arm, saw a lithe figure vault over the fence on the farther side of the corral and dart forward among the milling cattle. Now, when cattle begin to mill, it takes a brave man on a brave, well-trained horse to trust his chances in the midst of that ocean of tossing horns. But this man ventured it on foot. Max Strand could follow him easily, for the man's hat was off, and the firelight glittered on his black hair. The glimmering head darted here and there among the circling cattle. Now it was lost, swamped to all appearances under a score of trampling hooves. Again it reappeared on the farther side. Max Strand could see the runner in a comparatively open spaces, racing like a trained sprinter, and he headed straight towards a wall of tossing horns. They were longhorns, and one sway of those lowered heads could drive the hard, sharp point through and through the body of a man. Yet straight at this impassable wall the stranger rushed, like a warrior in his berserker madness, leaping naked upon the hedge of spears. At the verge of the danger, the man sprang high into the air 2 leaps, from back to back among the herd, and was across the thickest of dangers, down once more onto the ground, and dodging past the outskirts of the bellowing cows. Over the nearest fence he vaulted, disappeared into the smoke which vomited from the mouth of the burning barn. "God Almighty," groaned Ha-Ha Langley, "can he get the hoss out?" "It ain't possible," answered Max Strand. "All hosses go mad when they gets in a fire, even when they sees a fire. Look at them fools over yonder in the corral." For indeed, in the horse corral a score of frantic animals were attempting to leap the high rails in the direction of the burning barn. Their stamping and snorting came volleying up the hill to the watchers. "All hosses goes mad," concluded Max Strand, And Barry'll get trampled under the feet of his own hoss even if he gets to the stall, which he won't. Looky there. Out of the rush of fire and smoke at the door of the barn, Dan Barry stumbled blindly and fell back upon the ground. Ha-Ha Langley began to twist his cold hands together in an ecstasy. The hoss is gone and the wolf is gone and Barry is beat, he chuckled to himself. Mac, I wouldn't have missed this for 10 days' ride. It's worth it. But see the gal and that new gent, Mac. For when the clamor arose outside the house, Buck Daniels had run to the window. For many reasons he had not taken off his clothes this night, but had laid down on the bed and folded his hands behind his head to wait. With the first outcry he was at the window, and there he saw the flames curling above the roof of the barn, and next, by that wild light, how Dan Barry raced through the dangerous corral, and then he heard the shrill neighing of Satan and saw Dan disappear in the smoking door of the barn. Fear drew Buck Daniels one way, but a fine impulse drew him another. He turned away from the window with a curse. He turned back to it with a curse, and then muttering, "He went through hell for me. Him and me together. We'll go through hell again." He ran from the room and thundered down the crazy stairs, and as he left the house, he found Kate Cumberland, and they went on together, running without a word to each other. Only when he came beside her, she stopped short and flashed one glance at him. And by that glance, he knew that she understood why he was there, and that she accepted his sacrifice. Now they hurried around the outside edge of the corrals, and as they approached the flaming barn from one side, the men from the bunkhouse rushed up from the other. It was Buck Daniels who reached Dan as the latter stumbled back from the door of the barn, surrounded by a following cloud of smoke, and fell stumbling to the ground. And Buck raised him, and the girl was instantly beside them. She had thrown on a white dressing gown when she rose from bed. It was girded high across her breast, and over it showed her bright hair, flashing like liquid gold in growing light. She now received the semi-conscious burden of Dan Barry, and Buck Daniels stepped forward close to the smoke. He began to shout directions which the two watchers behind the hill could not hear, though they saw his long arms point and gesticulate, and they could see his speaking lips. But wild confusion was on the crowd of cowpunchers. They ran here and there. One or two brought buckets of water and tossed the contents uselessly into the swirling red-stained hell of the smoke. But most of them, they ran here and there, accomplishing nothing. "And all this come from one little match, Mac," cried Haw-Haw ecstatically at the ear of Mac Strand. "All what we're seeing. Look at that gal, Mac. She's out of her wits. She's fooling about Barry, doing no good." A gust of smoke and fire must have met Barry face to face when he entered that barn, for he seemed now as helpless as if he were under a strong narcotic influence. He leaned heavily back into the arms of the girl, his head rolling wildly from side to side. Then, clearer than before, dominating all the confusion and noise, and with a ringing trumpet note of courage in it, the black stallion neighed again from his burning stall. It had a magic effect upon Barry. He stood up and tore himself from the arms of the girl. They saw her gesture and cry to the surrounding men for help, and a dozen hands were stretched out to keep the madman from running again into the fire. They might better have attempted to hold a wild horse with their naked hands. He slipped and he broke through their grips, and a second later had leaped into the inferno of smoke, running bent close to the ground, where the pure air, if there was any, was sure to be. "The gal's sick," said Haw-Haw Langley. "Look, Mac." And he began to laugh in that braying voice which had given him his nickname. Yet even in his laughter his eyes were brightly observant. Not a single detail of misery or grief was lost upon him. He drank it in. He fed his famine-stricken soul upon it. Kate Cumberland had buried her face in her arms. Buck Daniels, attempting to rush in after Dan Barry, had been caught beneath the arms by Dr. Byron and another, and was now borne struggling back. And from the very heart of the burning barn, the sharp single whistle burst, and over the rolling smoke and fire rose the answering neigh. A human voice could not have spoken more intelligibly. "I wait in trust." After that neigh and whistle, a quiet fell over the group at the barn door. There was nothing they could do. There was not enough wind to blow the flames from this barn to one of the neighboring sheds. All they could do was stand still and watch the progress of the conflagration. The deep, thick voice of Mac Strand broke in. "Start praying, Haw-Haw, that hoss don't kill Barry when he gets to him. Start praying that Barry is left for me to finish." He must have meant his singular request more as a figure of speech than a real demand. But an hysterica was upon Haw-Haw Langley. He stretched up his vast, gaunt arms to the dim spot of fire in the central heavens above the fire. And Haw-Haw prayed for the first and last time in his life. "O Lord, give me this one favor. Bring Barry safe out of the barn. Bring him out even if you got to bring that damned hoss with him. Bring him out and save him for Mac Strand to meet. And God Almighty, let me be around somewheres when they meet." This strange exhibition Mac Strand watched with a glowering eye. "But he ain't possible," he said positively. "I've been in fires. Barry can't live through that fire. And if he does, a hoss'll finish him. It ain't possible for him to come out." From half the roof of the shed, flames now poured. But presently, a great shower of sparks rose at the farthest end of the barn. Then Haw-Haw heard the sound of beating and crashing. "Hey!" he screamed. "Barry's reached that black hoss, and that black hoss is beating him into the floor." "You fool," answered Mac Strand calmly. "Barry has got a beam or something, and he's smashing down that burning partition of the box stall. That's what he's doing. Listen." High over the fire, once again rose the neighing of the black horse, a sound of unspeakable triumph. "You're right," groaned Haw-Haw, downcast. "He's reached the hoss." He had hardly finished speaking when Mac Strand said, "Anyway, he'll never get out. This end wall of the barn's fallen in." Indeed, the outer wall of the barn nearest the door was wavering in a great section and slowly tottering in. Another moment or two it would crash to the floor and block the way of Dan Barry coming out with a flaming ruin. Next the watchers saw a struggle among the group which watched. 3 men were struggling with Buck Daniels, but presently he wrenched his arms free, struck down 2 men before him with swinging blows of his fists, and leaped into the smoke. "He's gone nutty like a crazy hoss with the sight of the fire," said Mac Strand quietly. He ain't, cried Haw-Haw Langley, wild with excitement. "He's holding back the burning wall to keep the way clear, damn him." Indeed, the tottering wall, not having leaned to a great angle, was now being pushed back by some power from the inside of the barn and kept erect, though now and again it swayed in as though the strength which held it was faltering under the strain. Now the eyes of the watchers were called to the other end of the barn by a tremendous crashing. The entire section of that part of the roof fell in, and a shower of sparks leaped up into the heart of the sky, lighting the distant hills and drawing them near like watchers of the horror of the night. "That's the end," said Mac Strand. "Haw-Haw, they wasn't any good in your prayer." "I ain't a professional praying man," answered Haw-Haw defensively, "but I done my best." If he was cut short by a chorused cry from the watchers near the door of the barn, and then, through the vomited smoke and the fire, leapt the unsaddled body of Satan, bearing on his back the crouched figure of Dan Barry. And in the arms of Barry, limp, his head hanging down loosely, was the body of the great black dog Bart. A fearful picture. The smoke swept following around the black stallion, and a great tongue of flame leapt hungrily after the trio. But the stallion stood with head erect and ears flattened, paw on the ground. With that cloud of destruction blowing him, he stood like the charger which the last survivor might ride through the ruin of the universe in the twilight of the gods. And at that same instant, another smoke-clad figure lunged from the door of the barn, his hands outstretched as though he felt and fumbled his way through utter darkness. It was Buck Daniels, and as he cleared the door, the section of the tottering wall which he had upheld to keep the way clear for the 3 wavered, sagged, and then sank in thunder to the floor, and the whole barn lay a flame-tossed mass of ruin. The watchers had scattered before the plunge of Satan, but he came to a sliding halt, as if his rider had borne heavily back upon the reins. Barry slipped from the stallion's back with the wounded dog, and he kneeled above the limp figure. "It ain't the end," growled Mac Strand. "That hoss will go running back into the fire. It ain't hoss nature to keep from going mad at the sight of a fire." In answer to him, the black stallion whirled and raised his head high, and with floundering mane and tail neighed a ringing defiance at the raising flames. Then he turned back and nuzzled the shoulder of his master, who was working with swift hands over the body of Black Bart. "Anyway," snarled Ha-Ha Langley, "the damned wolf is dead." "I don't know," said Mac Strand. Maybe not. There's quite a pile that I don't know." "If you want to get rid of the hoss," urged Ha-Ha, writhing in the glee of new inspiration, "now's the time for it, Mac. Get out your gun and pot that black before the crowd can get after us. We'll be miles away. They ain't a saddled hoss in sight." "Well, if you don't want to do it, I will." And he whipped out his gun. But Mac Strand reached across and dragged the muzzle down. "We done all we're going to do tonight. Seems like God's been a-listening pretty close around here." He turned his horse, and Ha-Ha reluctantly followed suit. Still, as they trotted slowly away from the burning barn, Ha-Ha kept his glance fixed behind him until a final roaring crash and bellowing sound of fire that smote the zenith announced the end of the barn. Then Ha-Ha turned his face to his companion. "Now what?" he demanded. "Well, we go to Elkhead, and we sit down and we wait," answered Mac Strand. "If that dog gets well, he'll bring Barry to us. Then all I've got to do is defend myself." Ha-Ha Langley twisted up his face and he laughed, silently, to the red-stained sky. Well, there you go. That's, it seems to me like them two are asking for more trouble than they can handle. That's just me. But we're going to find out. We'll find out next time we tell some parts of this story, probably next week. Hey, y'all, it was nice talking to you tonight. Remember, this was a 1-year anniversary for Ginger, and, well, I guess myself, too. And don't forget, we'll be here for more. This isn't the end. We're starting to have fun at it, too. And with that, good night, everyone. This is Clay Steele.